Welcome to Sagenheim. In the previous, the 13th episode of the Thidrekssaga, we heard about the loss of a royal item, a king as a guarantor, and a very special theft. So let's hear more from the olden days. Velent closed up his smithy, stood every day before the king's table, and served until the appointed day. When the day of the contest arrived, already early in the morning, Achilles took his mail breeches and put them on, and went out into the market square and amused himself by showing himself off. Everyone who saw him said that they had never seen iron as good as that. It was doubled and amazingly well forged. And when the time for the day meal had arrived, he put on his birnie. It was wide and long and doubled everywhere. He went to the king's table, and it seemed that no man had better armor or better birnie than this one. Achilles was happy and cheerful, and boasted greatly about his new armor. And when Achilles came before the king's table, he set the helmet on his head. It was well polished and amazingly large and thick, and this armor pleased the king well. When the king had eaten his fill and the table had been carried away, Achilles went outside to a field where a chair was standing, and he sat on it. Then the king went out along with all of his men, including Velent. Achilles said that he was ready to settle his bet. Velent went to his smithy, got the sword Nidung, and returned to the king. After drawing the sword, Velent went to the back of the chair where Achilles was sitting, placed the blade of the sword against the helmet, and spoke to Achilles, asking him if he felt it. Achilles answered, "Strike with all of your might, and do as if you had need of it, if it will do you any good." And Velent thrust so hard with the sword, and struck so that it split the helmet and the head, the birnie, and the body all the way down to the belt, and thus ended the days of Achilles' life. Many men in this land say that when a man has his arrogance at his highest, he can then be laid the lowest. And now the king asked that Velent should give him the sword, and he himself would carry it away. Velent replied, "I shall first put it in the scabbard that lies back in my smithy, and then I shall present it to you all together." This pleased the king greatly. Now Velent went back to his smithy, and tossed Nidung under the bellows, and took the other sword, put it in the scabbard, and brought it to the king. The king, believing it was the same sword Velent had used to perform his great deed, now thought that he had the greatest treasure that could ever be found in the world, and that a greater would never be found. And so it remained for some time. King Nidung sat in his kingdom, and with him was Velent, the famous smith, who is called Velent by the Varangians. He forged all kinds of treasures from gold and silver, and from any material that could be forged. Velent is so famous in the northern half of the world that there's no higher praise of workmanship than to say that it was Velent's skill that made it. Velent was in high favor with King Nidung. He enjoyed great honor, and was of all men the most skillful and most widely renowned. One day, when King Nidung was sitting at a table, men came before the king and told him that a great army was coming into the kingdom, and that it had done much damage. King Nidung summoned forces, and the army marched 5 days before they were noticed. One evening, when he had set up his tents, it occurred to the king that his victory stone lay at home. In those days, kings had a stone that had the virtue of granting victory to whichever side possessed it. It had this effect particularly when the warriors were troublesome or thought themselves heroes. I do not know whether that was from the nature of the stone itself or because of the trust they had in the stone. The king thought very ill that the stone was at home. He had his counselors and his close friends called, and he said that he would give half of his kingdom along with his daughter to the man who would bring him the stone before the sun would rise in the east the morning after. Many were eager for the trip, but few dared try the journey in such a short period of time as was allowed, because the evening was already past. The king saw that no one would take the trip, and he called Velent to him and said, "My dear friend Velent, will you make this journey?" And Velent spoke, "Sir, I will go on your advice, if you will grant that wish you promised." And the king spoke, "We shall carry out what we have said." Now Velent rode on his good horse Skemming. He had gotten the horse from the horse farm where, as has been told, Studa the Old was caretaker. And this horse was as fast as a flying bird, and was great and fine in all respects. Velent rode away in the night, and went as far in a day as the king had covered in 5 days. He arrived before the castle at midnight, and took the victory stone, and rode back to the king's tent before the sun rose in the east. Now Velent let his horse Skemming gallop as in a tournament, and 7 men from the king's tent came to meet him and to give the horse water. Their chief was the king's steward. They rode to meet Velent, greeting him warmly as he did them. The steward spoke, "My dear friend, do you have the victory stone? Certainly you are, unlike all other men in respects, since you have made this journey in such a short time." Velent spoke, "I believe I have the stone, and it seems I have carried out the mission as well as I could." The steward said, "Give me the victory stone, and I will give it to the king, and I will give you in return as much gold and silver as you ask." Velent replied to the steward, "You might not have carried out this journey worse than I, and I do not believe that you will take the stone from my hands. There is no courtesy in asking such things when as much is at stake as in this case." And the steward spoke, "You are a fool if you think that you will receive the king's daughter. You are a smith and of low degree, and others, who come from the best families in the land, have not received her. It shall now turn out in a way that is uncomfortable for you. Attack now, my men, and draw your swords. He shall give up the victory stone, and along with it his life." And then they attacked him, and he drew his sword Mimung, and struck at the steward himself, striking his helmet and his head in two, so that he fell dead to the ground. The other 6 who were there fled. Velent now went before the king and gave him the stone. Velent then told him of all the events of his journey, and that he had killed the steward. The king spoke, "You shall not have my thanks for that. You have killed my best and dearest servant. Go away as quickly as you can, and never come into my sight again. If you do not leave, I shall have you bound, and you shall die like the worst thief." Velent moved away from the king and spoke, "You have done such an offense against me, king, because you wish to break our bargain. Not everyone will be pleased about this, even though I was not pleased in this case." And Velent departed now in shame from the king. The same day, the king and his army met the raiders and fought, and King Nidung was victorious and purged the land, bringing peace. He returned home with much honor, and he thought he had well earned it. And the case passed so that no one knew where Velent had gone, but King Nidung was at home in his kingdom. Velent was much displeased. He earned the king's wrath, and he himself was outlawed. He thought of revenge, and once he went to the king's court, in secret and in disguise, and he went into the kitchen and called himself a cook. He joined the others and cooked food, working along with the other cooks. Now a dish came before the king and the maiden. She took a knife and stuck it into a piece of food that lay on the dish before her. It was the nature of the knife that if something was unclean in the food, its handle would immediately sing out. And the maiden found that some poison had been put in the food, and she told her father. He became angry and had the man called back. He now recognized Velent, who was led before the king. The king spoke thus: "You shall not lose your life, Velent, because of your skillfulness, even though you have done ill." And he was set down before the king. The king had the sinews in both feet cut, at the point where they go from the calf to the instep, and from there down to the Achilles tendon to the heel bone. And as long as Velent lived after that, both his feet were useless for walking. Velent now lay badly treated in the king's court. One time he spoke to the king. "Sir," he said, "I shall always know how to value the fact that you have cut the sinews in both my feet, for I have deserved this. And now I shall never part from you as long as I live, and I do not wish to, even if I could." And the king spoke. "Certainly, I shall repay you well, and more than repay you, and I shall give you as much gold and silver as you ask for." The king had a smithy built, and Velent was carried there. Now Velent sat every day and made things for the king from gold and silver, and anything else that can be forged. The king was glad that Velent was unable to go away, and the results seemed very good to him. King Nidung had 4 children, 3 sons and 1 daughter. And one day the 2 younger sons of King Nidung went to Velent's smithy with their bow and asked him to forge them arrows. But Velent said he did not have time for that. "And," said Velent, "even though you are the children of the king, I shall not forge anything for you unless it is your father's will and command, which must be sent to me in a message today. But if you want me to make something for you, you should grant me my request, and it is very small." They asked what it was, and Velent said that they should walk backwards to the smithy, just after the snow had fallen fresh. Boys never care whether they go backwards or forwards, and that took place during the winter. In the same night, there fell snow, and on the next morning, the king's sons came to the smithy before the sun, having done as Velent had asked, and they waited for Velent the smith. Velent did not make them wait for him. He quickly closed the door fast, and then he killed both of the king's sons and dug a deep grave under the bellows. Later that day, the princes were missed, and it was not known where they had gone. The king thought they might have gone to the forest to hunt birds or animals, or to the stream to catch fish. They were looked for until mealtime, but they were not found. They went to Velent and asked him if the boys had come to him. Velent said they had come there and had gone away again, that one could see on the path how they had gone back to the king's hall. They had their bows and arrows, and it seems most likely to me that they had gone to the forest. Then they returned, and they saw that the boys' tracks went homeward, and no one was suspicious of Velent in this case. The king had them search for his sons for many days, but they were never found. They left off searching any longer, and it seemed most likely to the king that they had gone into the forest and an animal must have injured them, or if they had gone to the shore, that the sea had injured them. They never found out what happened, but Velent had remembered the dishonor and shame that had been done him, because he was not lacking in cruelty, and he was harsh of nature. And now he thought he had avenged himself somewhat, whether or not he had gained more revenge. Then Velent took the boys and scraped all the flesh from the bones. After that, he took the skulls and brought gold and silver and made 2 large drinking cups. From the shoulder blades and the hip bones he made ale ladles and covered them with gold and silver. He made knife handles from some of the bones, and from some he made flutes, and from some keys, and from some he made candlesticks to stand on the king's table. He made something for the king's table from every bone, and they would have been great treasures if they had not been made with such falsehood and deceit. And when these treasures were finished, the king had the most powerful man at his banquet. And with these words, the 14th part of the Thidrekssaga has come to an end. The Olden Days tell us more about terrible acts of revenge, wondrous flights, and the birth of a boy in the next episode of the Thidrekssaga. So thanks for tuning in, and see you again next time, back here at Sagenheim.